Welcome to another episode of Financial 15, going back to our original series, looking at all the different behavioral finance issues. Today, we're looking at the seduction of pessimism. This really comes from the book, Morgan Housel's book, helps answer us the question, if you say something good, no one really pays attention, you say the world's ending, you get on TV. Why is that? We're going to tackle that today. You want to stick around.
Yes, we're dealing with more behavioral finance today, the third part in our original series, and we are dealing with the pessimistic aspects and how they become a little bit more. If you want to find out about the other options that we've done in this original series or any of their other videos, that plus blogs and a lot more. But today we are talking about the seduction of pessimism. More of the if it bleeds, it leads scenario. Isn't that the way things go? That's the way they put it on TV. So Clint, describe why pessimism is such a seduction for us going forward.
Yeah, we'll get into a lot of it here. Again, I mentioned in the intro there, related to Morgan Housel's book, Psychology of Money, that he's got a chapter on it in here. He also had an essay, which we'll link to in the description. But a few quick quotes for you, Kevin, that kind of brings the point home. Tell someone that everything will be great, and they'll likely either shrug you off or give you a skeptical eye. Tell someone they're in danger, and they'll give you your undivided attention. It's just the nature of how we are, right? That's the seduction of the pessimistic traits. The second quote there, again, these are both from Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. If a smart person tells me they have a stock pick that's going to rise tenfold in the next year, I immediately write them off as full of nonsense. If someone full of nonsense tells me a stock I own is about to collapse because of an accounting fraud, well, I'll clear my calendar and listen to every word they have to say. And I think the idea here, and this is, again, last one from the book, optimism sounds like a sales pitch. Pessimism sounds like someone's trying to help you. Why is that, Kevin? Why is it that that's the way our brains interpret these kind of events?
Well, it's more of that same scenario, right? If there's bad news out there, everybody wants to know about it. It's back to the loss aversion scenario. We are more likely to react on fear than we are on greed in any sort of scenario that way. Anytime you say something bad's going to go on, all of a sudden everybody's attention comes in. I mean, you've always said the same thing. If somebody yells fire, everybody's looking around. You want to get out of the house really quick. But if they tell you that, well, you know, the building's safe, it'll never catch on it. Nobody wants to know about these things. They don't want to know how well constructed things are. But loss aversion is huge. That's why anytime things start to go down, it usually escalates, and it escalates quickly. So the loss aversion is another one. We mentioned this beforehand in the emotions as to why this is dealt with that way. But yeah, loss aversion basically stems from a lot of this pessimistic scenario.
It does. The idea that if you lose $5,000, it's going to hurt probably twice as much as gaining $5,000 would feel. Losses are psychologically far more powerful than gains. It just, for most folks, some people are different, and it's always a matter of degree. Someone might be very risk averse. Someone might only be a little risk averse, but that concept certainly is consistent as part of the reason why you get this seduction of pessimism, why we can kind of get roped in to that pessimistic attitude. And they've done studies on this. It's not just us talking about it because it makes us feel good. We're actually do have some academics to back it up. I'll pull this up for you here, Kevin. This is from a Nobel Prize winning economist, Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book. He wrote a number of books. He's an academic. But the book this quote is from is called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he had a prospect theory he described in the book at a couple of principles. One of the principles was loss aversion. And when directly compared or weighted against each other, losses look larger than gains. This asymmetry between the power of positive and negative expectations or experiences, in his mind, has an evolutionary history. Organisms that treat threats as more urgent than opportunities have a better chance to survive and reproduce. He's kind of taken that loss aversion and given us the historical context of why it is we're like that. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it does. It makes sense in a lot of things throughout the, not just the financial industry, but, in general, in life sort of scenarios, as you mentioned, because the opportunity, better chance to survive and reproduce, that's what we want to do. That's why you have these reactions when something attacks. I mean, if we're dealing strictly on the financial side, I mean, we can take a look at it. How long do bears last? Less than a year. How long do bulls last? More than 5 years. Why? Because you usually get that huge swath where everything falls off quick because of the loss. Everybody's got to get out before they lose everything. Whereas the gains coming back, well, it's a slow process. Not everybody's involved, and you don't really get that hype. But the hype when somebody says, oh, well, we're going to have to worry about this, or we're going to have to worry about this, that sets fear into everybody, and the loss aversion comes right there. So that's why, I mean, pessimistic thoughts. Why on the news is it always a bad news lead story? Because it sells. And that's part of the rationale behind the seduction of the pessimism we have.
Yeah, and in this particular case, comment saying that's part of how humans are wired, right? Part of our organism, that we treat threats more urgently than we treat opportunities. So this loss aversion, maybe it has an evolutionary context. That was the theory anyway. But Morgan Housel, in his book, he goes through 3 reasons as to why he thinks financial specifically is prone to the seduction of pessimism. And I think he's right. And we'll go through a couple of them here. The first one, Kevin, why is it that financial negativity kind of draws us right in? It's because money's ubiquitous. Everyone can relate to money, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, exactly, if something bad happens, it affects everyone and captures everyone's attention. I mean, that's the biggest one, because we all have that. We all need that. That's the way society's been designed. So you have it that way. I mean, one that we've talked about beforehand, weather. I mean, if there is a tropical storm or a hurricane coming to Florida, I feel sorry for the people in Florida, but that has little effect on me. Being here up where I am, it's not going to really have any change in what I'm doing. But if you talk about money, everything's going to go down, the market's going to collapse. Well, that's more of a global scenario. How is it going to affect everybody? And all of a sudden that fear and panic sets into everyone, which is why it's more of a globalized thing. It is ubiquitous, as you said, and that's an important scenario to look at for why money and finance tend to be one of the big reasons about the pessimistic scenarios.
Yeah, it draws people in, right? You have a YouTube video that says how the world's collapsing and everyone's going to lose all their money. Well, people will click on that because we're pessimistic, or as we said, we treat threats with more urgency than we do opportunities. Same idea. Money's ubiquitous. It impacts everybody. A second reason, and this has to do with just how we deal with stats, it's that pessimists often extrapolate them. They extrapolate the current trend, and they don't favor in how markets can adapt. So essentially take the current trend, which could be bad, and just extrapolate as if it lasts forever.
Yeah, I mean, all we have to do is just basically look at this century. We had the tech wreck that happened in 2000. Y2K was going to come. Everything was going to be wiped out. There was no way we were ever going to get back to normal society. Well, things didn't happen. And slowly but surely, we managed to adapt. We figured out how to use old economy with new economy. In 2008, global recession because of the housing market. Well, they came out with quantitative easing and a few other things. There are scenarios that will correct this. But at the time we see it, we don't find a way out. Right now, inflation is high. It's never, ever going to end. Well, we've seen it beforehand. Eventually, this will come to an end in scenarios along those lines. But yeah, we don't account for that scenario.
Yeah, exactly. The markets adapt, and it's hard for us to put that in. I'm pulling up here on my screen. This is from the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to highlight the date here, Kevin, because relevant to what you said,
Yes.
December 29th, 2008. So the end of 2008, you painted the picture. 2008 was a bad year. Housing crisis, the subprime meltdown, it all kind of came to a head. The stock market's falling. And what does the Journal put on the front page in 2008? Well, Igor Panarin, I may have enunciated that wrong.
That's it. Panarin's right.
A Russian professor that essentially says the world's coming to an end, extrapolating the current trend. And even at a time, he said it was going to come to an end in 2010. And he had this chart. I'm scrolling down to the chart here, where the U.S. was going to get divided. The states, it would be so bad that you'd see a breakup of the union. The country would be divided into bits. You'd have Alaska that would go to Russia, in his mind. Hawaii would probably go to Japan or China. The Texas Republic would be a group of states here, the southern states. You have a California Republic. This one is my favorite. The Central or North American Republic will likely be part of Canada or under Canadian influence. So you had a whole group of states in his mind would join Canada. And not to pick into the details here, but it just shows you extrapolation of that current trend can easily lead you to extremes. And when you're in that moment, it's easy to fall into prey into that kind of ideal, right? And this, again, Wall Street Journal, front page, end of 2008. So all the bad news, they hit you with some more right at the top.
Exactly. And that's the biggest factor going forward, right? I mean, at the end of 2008, you could print this story and put it on the front of the Wall Street Journal because people might actually believe in it. If you get all of a sudden into 2013, 2014, when the economy's running well and everything's there, that doesn't even get looked at by anybody. It's not going to be placed anywhere because there's no fear anymore. There's no pessimism. We don't see this happening because of no reason. So anytime you get that sort of scenario, you're right. That's the one thing we have to look at. But here's another one that you can take a look at, which, sort of gives the seduction of pessimism in the opposite way, doesn't it?
Yeah, the opposite trend. Yeah. So again, this particular example comes from the Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel's book. Take Japan in the late 1940s. So the end of World War II. Obviously, it's gutted by defeat of the World War. Now, imagine in that scenario, if a Japanese academic wrote in the newspaper, similar to how we had that paper on the Wall Street Journal. They said this: chin up, everyone. Within our lifetime, our economy will grow by almost 15 times the current size.
Yep.
Where our life expectancy will nearly double. Our stock market will produce returns like any other country in history has rarely seen. We'll become a world leader in electronic innovation and corporate managerial systems. And by the way, Americans will be our closest ally and will try to copy our economic insights. Now, if they would have posted that in the paper, people would have laughed at it.
Oh,
It was,
no doubt.
yeah, easy for us to see an extrapolation of the current trend. Very hard for us to see how markets would adapt and how they would change. Of course, this is exactly true. It's what happened after World War II and how Japan rebuilt to become the economy they are today. And of course, the prior story, that was kind of an extrapolation of the bad news of 08. That one never happened. But it's hard for us to see that change, right? It's easy to extrapolate the current trend. Hard for us to see how markets will eventually adapt, but they do. Again and again, we see multiple examples in history of how those adaptations take place.
And that goes right back to exactly what we started with the origination, where you're mentioning about somebody tells you the stock's going to go tenfold up. I don't buy it. I'm shiting it all off. But if they tell me it's going to go down, I'm going to believe in it. It's the same scenario there, right? Nobody expected Japan to be able to recover. Sure enough, not only did they recover, they became the third largest economy in the world at one point. So, I mean, they've done a really phenomenal job of what's going on, but nobody would have believed you back after the bombings of Hiroshima and everything along those lines. So you're right. Pessimism, much more seductive to everybody going forward. Optimism, not quite the same way. As you say, mentions it looks like salesmanship. You're only trying to do this to try and make people feel better. When in reality is, sooner or later, that optimistic view is going to have to come into line.
Yeah, and we talked about quickly here, we'll finish up. We talked about 3 of the reasons that Morgan Housel listed in his book, the Ubiquity of Money, Pessimism, awesome, extrapolating the current trend. And the third one here, why the seduction of pessimism? Well, progress happens too slowly to notice, but setbacks happen too quickly to ignore. And there's so many examples of this. I'll use one of the automobile. Like, look over the last 5 decades, 6 decades, the progress we made from the Model T to now where they're essentially computers in your automobile. Like, that progress happened slowly and it took a long time. And there are lots of setbacks. So that progress happens too slowly to notice. But if there's a car crash, you better believe that'll make front page or that'll be on the news. Same idea. The setbacks get all the attention. The progress happens too quickly to really pick up.
Yeah, we want everything to be instantaneous and done. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen on the optimistic side. It takes a while to get there, whereas the pessimistic side, it can happen in an instant. And that's exactly the third point.
The progress is you take the stairs up, but you might take the elevator down with one of those setbacks. So the elevator, the quick drop gets the attention. The slow rise on the stairs can often be ignored. So why is this all important? Well, I think we hit on it during our ramblings there. It impacts our decisions, certainly impacts your financial decisions, definitely easy to fall into the trap of pessimism, definitely when there's market turbulence, but you don't want to make big decisions while you're kind of in that mode because, as we talked about, markets change, markets adapt, and you could end up really hurting your financial plan if you don't kind of counteract some of that inclination to steer towards the pessimism.
Yeah, that's exactly the important point, is that we need to know that, not everything is a short-term basis, and pessimism usually is a short-term basis. Longer term is what you're looking for. So, I mean, if you plan on retiring now, if you're going to last 30 years, this short-term bump is really going to be a minor play, but telling that to people now, they won't listen to the fact that, I've got many more years. And as we've mentioned beforehand, easiest way to solve this sort of scenario, or at least try and eliminate a lot of the pessimism, have that plan in place. Have it written down if you've got it, because then you can see, I'm not looking for something a year down the road. I'm looking for the next 20. My plan says I'm going to be okay. Even if I have the hiccup that happens for a year or two at the most, everything should be going forward that way and work out well in my favor.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. You write the plan down. You can come back to it. It can provide you some guide throughout turbulent times. If you have more questions on this topic or any topic, please reach out to us. Chatwithclintonandkevin.com. You can see it on the bottom of your screen. We'd certainly love to hear from you. Love to take your questions. Any parting comments for the folks, Kevin?
Well, I'm going to play right into our seduction of pessimism. If I was just looking outside, I'd say that today is a terrible day to go out and do anything because it's raining. But I know that by the end of the week, things will be sunny and nice. And even though you don't believe me now, just wait till we get to the weekend.
I'm going to hold you to that. If it rains this weekend, you'll hear from me. Take care, everyone.